Welcome to the Pick Six Podcast, everyone. The All 32, our coverage of every NFL team continues. Today, we're talking about the Carolina Panthers with my guy, Joe Person from The Athletic. You might wonder why Will Brinson, North Carolina resident, isn't doing this podcast. He's still on vacation. He's been on vacation for what feels like 2 months now. But I am happy to talk to Joe. Joe and I go way back. I mean, like 25 years way back. You know what's funny, Joe? Like every opportunity I get, I always say, yeah, I went to college with Mike Tomlin and Sean McDermott. I'm going to have to add Joe Person there because Joe Person is a William & Mary alum as well. Joe writes for The Athletic. Joe, how are you doing, brother?
Doing good, man. And you're right, man. It's cool to be on with a fellow tribesman. That was a long time ago, but we don't need to start adding up the years. It's just good to have that tribe pride.
Yeah, so Joe played football in college, William & Mary. D1AA, they call it FCS now. But here's the thing, a lot of people would have no idea about unless they followed FCS football for the last 30 years. Jimmy Laycock, who just retired recently, was one of the winningest coaches in FCS history, maybe even college football history. But the number of athletes that William & Mary put out on the football field is pretty crazy, given that it wasn't a big-time program in terms of Power 5 day. Who are some of the guys that you remember playing with that were just – because Mike Tomlin was a receiver. No one even knows that. Sean McDermott played in the secondary. He was a safety, sort of small school guy. You were tight end. Did you play with Sean Knight, or was that after you?
I did play with Sean Knight. He was the quarterback who followed a guy named Chris Hakel. Chris Hakel was a big kid who spent some time with the Redskins and the Falcons, I think practice squads.
He was drafted too, though. He was like a 4th or 5th round pick, I think.
I think he was. And, of course, that was back when Joe Gibbs had a connection to the program, and J.D. Gibbs, who very sadly died about a year and a half ago with degenerative brain disease. J.D. was a defensive back, very humble kid. Like, this was at the height of the Washington's success under Joe Gibbs. Joe occasionally would helicopter down from Ashburn, Virginia, go to a game on Saturday and be back at, for the team meeting Saturday night in Ashburn. So anyway, J.D. Gibbs was there. You know who was probably, in terms of in my era, who went on to have the most NFL success was a kicker, Steve Christie.
That's right.
Steve Christie?
Yeah, he's a Lambda Chi.
You can give him the secret handshake.
That's right. I don't know if I remember it. But, yeah, he actually came back. You probably left because I think I was a junior at that point. And I didn't see him, but he came by the fraternity house. He had a few beers, 4 to 20 beers. And I think he ended up sort of giving out those little, you get branded or whatever. He got his redone. And I think he was really bothered about the idea the next morning. He's like, oh, my God, my wife's going to see this. She's going to kill me. I forgot about Steve Christie. That's right. Yeah, good times. Yeah, it was a simpler time back then, Joe.
Steve Christie, you'll remember, was the one and only time I've ever gone to Canton. I was covering like a high school championship football game in the Canton area for a little tiny paper in Huntington, West Virginia. We covered up Southern Ohio. Go to Canton before the game. Steve Christie's cleat is being memorialized in there because he had finished the greatest playoff comeback in NFL history, that Bills against the Oilers game.
Yeah.
Frank Reich. But Christie's field goal won it, and they had his cleat in Canton that day.
Nice. So how long have you, before The Athletic, you were with the Charlotte Observer, how long have you covered the Panthers?
This will be my 11th year, I think. I started 2010. In that very dubious distinction. That was the 2-14 year. Lots of dysfunction with John Fox was a lame duck coach. They tried to go into the season with Matt Moore as the quarterback. He got hurt like in week 2. They had to turn to Jimmy Clausen, rookie, way overmatched. And 2-14 followed, and Cam Newton followed, and also the hiring of Ron Rivera. So it was it was a lot like this year in terms of, kind of a restart, which is what they're doing, of course, with Matt Rhule. Like Ron Rivera had to go through the lockout his first year and Cam's first year.
Right.
And so now, of course, Matt Rhule, Teddy Bridgewater, this whole crew's having to go through the COVID and being away from the building.
So Matt Rhule, you mentioned him, coach at Baylor, coach at Temple, had success at both places, and he parlayed that into the job at Carolina. He's a young guy. He seems very outgoing. What are your initial impressions of him? And you get the impression when you hear him talk that he wants to make everyone happy. You can't do that in NFL locker room like perhaps you can in a college locker room. What are your impressions of just your first impressions of Matt Rhule and the challenges that's rebuilding?
So I like his energy a lot, and I like the fact, Ryan, that he has not made any excuses. Like, you could make a pretty strong argument that the Panthers have the odds stacked against him more than any other kind of first-year coach. Of course, we know Mike McCarthy and Ron Rivera both coached in the NFL before a lot. Joe Judge is a new coach, but he has a returning quarterback. So, Matt Rhule has exactly 1 year under his belt of NFL experience, and it was in his assistant offensive line. But having said all that, anytime we've gotten him on a Zoom or what have you, he's not making excuses. And I think his players notice that, because you start doing that kind of stuff, and then the players have a built-in excuse. And I've liked his energy. He's a guy that knows both sides of the football. And because of that, I think he knows enough to where he can delegate but not be all too hands-on. I mean, he's really more of a kind of overseer, program builder than he is like an offensive or a defensive play coach.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, that's the ability to sort of give up the micromanaging part of it can serve you well if you have the right people around you. So let's talk about that. Joe Brady, William & Mary alum, but he's substantially younger than we are. This is his first year in the NFL. Obviously, he had a meteoric rise last year with LSU and that offense that turned things around from the year before when they were mostly run-based, it felt like. And then Phil Snow, the other side, who's a veteran defensive coordinator. What are the challenges that both these guys face coming from different perspectives in terms of age and experience and the rosters they have around them?
Yeah, I mean, kind of what we were talking about earlier. I mean, the challenge for Phil Snow is he lost a lot of good players. I think, and we'll get back to offense. I think Joe Brady's got some weapons. Phil Snow, he walks in the door and Luke Kuechly's retiring and Gerald McCoy's leaving in free agency. Mario Addison's leaving in free agency. They're not re-signing James Bradbury. They had a lot of talent on defense that left. And so he's really kind of starting more from scratch than Joe Brady. Brady, he said this week on a Zoom with us. He said, I think anyone would envy an offensive coordinator who gets hired and inherits Christian McCaffrey.
Right.
He's absolutely the what Joe Brady walks into. And then even Teddy Bridgewater, I get the impression that this was a hand-picked guy, a hand-picked dude by Joe Brady. A lot of people kind of forget that before he had his big run with Joe Burrow last year at LSU, Brady was a low-level offensive assistant in New Orleans. And as such, when the Saints traded for Bridgewater before the 2018 season, it was like right before week one. It was like an end of training camp, end of preseason trade. And so Sean Payton and the rest of the offensive staff, they were getting ready for their opening week opponent. And the job of kind of bringing Bridgewater up to speed in that Saints offense fell to Joe Brady. And he and Bridgewater developed a bond then. They've stayed close over the years. And as I said, when it was very obvious that the Panthers were going to move on from Cam Newton, I think Teddy Bridgewater was Joe Brady's guy. They went out and got him. It doesn't mean that, he's going to be the answer for 5 years, but I think he's a good bridge type of quarterback, actually, from Cam Newton to whomever comes next. If Bridgewater blows it up and he's looking like that guy he was in Minnesota before that horrific injury, well, then good. Then they re-sign him and they roll with him. So I kind of like that signing for a team in rebuild.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. And you mentioned Christian McCaffrey. We saw what Clyde Edwards-Helaire did for that LSU offense last year for Joe Burrow. And Christian McCaffrey feels like a souped-up version of Clyde Edwards-Helaire in terms of versatility. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire caught 50-plus passes last year. And we all think about Joe Burrow making these passes down the field. How important is Christian McCaffrey, his versatility in doing not only helping Teddy Bridgewater, but helping Joe Brady do what he wants to do offensively?
Yeah, that's huge. Brady said this week that it would be injustice to call Christian McCaffrey just a running back.
Yeah.
He's not going to use him as such. He'll get plenty of touches out of the backfield, obviously. But, yeah, I mean, you make a great point with the LSU kid. Putting him out, and I don't know how much he did of that, but Christian McCaffrey will be spread out a lot. I mean, they'll have a lot of empty backfields. McCaffrey will be a part of that. The tight end, Ian Thomas, will be a part of that. So, and listen, it's not like Norv Turner was lining up Christian McCaffrey in an I formation and giving him power off tackle. So, you know, they were already doing a lot of this, but it's always cool to bring a fresh look to it. It's going to be this Joe Brady offense is going to have a ton of Saints influence, obviously. I mean, that's just where he learned. I did an interview a couple weeks ago with Will Greer, their backup quarterback, and he said, oh, yeah, like all the cut-ups we're watching are Saints and LSU. And so Brady will put his own stamp on it, but it's going to be fun. And, I don't think this team's going to be particularly good, but I think the offense will be fun to watch.
Yeah, so you mentioned the defense earlier. I want to ask you about, you mentioned all the losses. They drafted Derek Brown, which seemed like a pretty easy pick given where they were. They got Jeremy Chin, the safety, in the second round, and also Yetur Gross-Matos, the edge rusher out of Penn State. How important is it going to be for those guys to step up from day one, given all the losses they had, and sort of help out Brian Burns, last year's first-round pick?
Yeah, very important, and certainly Derek Brown will he'll be a day one starter. I don't know if Jeremy Chin's going to be a starter, but he'll be on the field a lot. Same with Gross-Matos. I'm glad you mentioned Burns because I really like that kid.
Yeah.
Of course, they drafted him out of Florida State last year thinking to run a 3-4. Well, now Phil Snow's back in a 4-3. And so there have been a lot of people, on my Twitter or whatever, how's Burns going to do in the 4-3? I'm like, this kid's a football player. I mean, is he a little lean? Yeah, but he's just a fast twitch edge rusher who was in the middle of a terrific rookie season until he stupidly got frustrated, punched the ground in Houston and broke his wrist.
Right.
Tried to play through it, but I like him a lot. He's gonna have to be a guy in this rebuild that is sort of a core fixture on defense, along with Trey Boston, who they re-signed, Shaq Thompson, who they re-signed. But the secondary, the cornerback position, especially when you're playing in a division with Drew Brees and Tom Brady and Matt Ryan, that said, they let Bradbury walk. Dante Jackson has been hit or miss his first 2 years. And then, they're kind of taking a flyer on Eli Apple. Yeah. So that I think they're going to give up some big numbers in the secondary.
It's a tough division too. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back talking more Panthers with Joe Person. All right, Joe, you sort of touched on it. I don't know if this is what you would go with or you would go with another position, but if there's a biggest position battle to watch as we move towards whatever training camp looks like, is it the secondary or is it somewhere else along the offensive line? What do you think it is?
Yeah, probably a couple different ones. I mean, Jeremy Chin, there's two new guys kind of vying for Eric Reed's old in the box safety spot. Justin Burris, who they signed from Cleveland, and then and the guy we've mentioned, Jeremy Chin. Probably because of my FCS background, I always am a sucker for these 1AA kids, and Chin comes out of Northern Illinois. He was a 0-star recruit leaving his Indianapolis high school, hits a growth spurt, goes from something like 5'10" to 6'3". He can run, he can hit. Obviously, he didn't play in the SEC, the ACC, the Big 12, but he held his own at Senior Bowl. And I think that's where he really got on the Panthers map and radar. And so I'm interested to see him. You know, the funny thing about the position battle, and I'm sure I'm going to do a story like that, but it's almost like, man, this first year just almost feels like Matt Rhule. Like, I don't even know if they're going to throw everybody out there and see what sticks. You know, like you can make a case that you're going to be position battles all over this place, which if you're like a young, unproven guy, like you better be, you know, you're fired up.
Yeah.
Because it's a clean slate. You know, they have some guys they sort of penciling in at various spots, but if some dude just comes out of nowhere, it's like, okay, cool, put him in there. What do we have to lose? We're not really expecting, not really. They are not expecting to contend this year, and so it's a developmental year, and you know, I think they're going to treat it as such.
Yeah, Vegas agrees with you because their win total for the Panthers is 5.5. So I don't know if I love the Panthers winning 6 games or 7 games. That seems like a good start for Matt Rhule. So what's the ceiling or the floor for you in your mind? What would be success for Panthers fans? Matt Rhule's first year, a lot of question marks, mostly on defense.
Probably success would be, I don't even know what the win total would look like. Let's say 5 or 6, but they're in a lot of games. They have guys that they can say, okay, Stephen Weatherly at defensive end, who we signed from the Vikings, he showed us he can play and be a difference maker. Or maybe it's Justin Burris, or you know, maybe it's Robbie Anderson. You know, they need to come out of this year with the guys they feel like are going to be the staples of when they hope either in 2021 or maybe more realistically 2022. And a lot of these guys, it's interesting. If you look at their free agents, with the exception of Shaq Thompson, who was already here, it was all 1 and 2 year deals. Like the whole idea is like everyone's on a prove it deal. If you're part of it, we'll re-sign you. And if not, hey, we appreciate you being here. You were part of this kind of weird bridge period, for lack of a better term. And we're going to sign some other guys and draft some other guys. So lots of those short contracts, and they have a lot of money to spend in future cap years. Of course, depending on what this all play out with the COVID and so forth.
Right. One last question about owner David Tepper. Do you think he'll have the patience to sit through what looks like not going to be a great year on paper? Because we know, I don't know if he got frustrated, but clearly he wanted to make changes. Started with Ron Rivera. Cam Newton's gone. Luke Kuechly retired. He hired a bunch of analytics guys. Do you think he's going to have the patience to sit through what could be a 3 or 4 win season?
You know, the only reason I say yes is I remember we were in a press conference with him. It wasn't even a press conference. We were kind of around like a boardroom table. It was a media gathering, but kind of like, you know, a small gathering. And someone asked him basically what you just said, what you just asked me. And he was the one who said, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day. He's like, do you think and he posed the question sort of back to us, but he said, do you think our fans would be cool if we have a couple years of struggle, if it meant like a lot of sustained success down the road? And we were all kind of, well, you know, sure. I do think, listen, Matt Rhule got a 7-year contract. He ain't going to be that patient. But absolutely, I think everyone sort of understands. Marty Herney seems to be, the general manager seems to be like the one guy, and Marty's kind of near the end of his rope in terms of getting near retirement age. But he's like the one guy who doesn't seem to like want to buy into the whole rebuild concept. But I think David Tepper's on board with it and willing to be patient.
Well, that's great. That's great for Carolina Panthers fans, and maybe someone should pass that clip on to Jimmy Haslam in Cleveland. Renowned lack of patience there. Kevin Stefanski might appreciate it. Joe, great talking to you, man. Usually I see you at the Super Bowl and the Senior Bowl Combine. I'm glad I got to talk to you in the off season. You can follow Joe at The Athletic, at Joseph Person on Twitter. And in my mind, best tight end in William Mary football history.
You're too kind, man, but this was fun. Hope you and your family stay healthy and safe, buddy.
Same to you, man.